Hello, folks. Hope you are doing well. Raven here with another Raven Night or Raven's Roost chill and read stream. I am very excited to be here with you guys. It's been a while since we did this, and I can't wait to do it again. This is going to be fun. So tonight, for those of you who are new, welcome. This is a chill stream, which means we're not playing any games. We're not doing any For Honor or Dead by Daylight or Persona or anything like that. We're not playing games. We're here to relax on a Monday afternoon or Monday evening, and I'm going to read some stories. They are all written by me because I've been a writer for a very, very long time, and I do enjoy telling stories and poems. And normally I would just upload these written, but since people say that they like the sound of my voice and like me reading stuff, I figured I would read for you guys. And so, yeah, as usual, tonight we'll be starting with a short story, or poem in this case. This is a poem written by me. Written, when was this written? May 9th, 2020. This is called The Night is Young. The Night is Young is a poem I wrote a while ago. My buddy Jay actually took it and turned it into a song. He sang it and added music to it. So we're going to start with that. So we'll read that, and then we will jump into whichever series y'all want to start with. We can finish up New Epic tonight, and then carry it on later. And then after that, we can decide if we do more Monster Club or more Raptors, or if we just drop Monster Club altogether and read something else. We will decide. All right, let's get started. So first of all, we have The Night is Young, written May 9th, 2020. Oh, the night is young, sitting up in bed, and here I wonder how close the lightning and loud the thunder. When the storm is past and wind song is sung, oh, but the night is young. The night, how it surrounds as I check under my bed to seek the monsters there, how dark the crevice is, and dreams take to the air as my wretched heart cries. The bitter message sounds, the night is still young. Around me lurk the demons, that which live in my head have come out instead. How cold is the gaze from eyes dank and dead. They speak to me again, and though I wish them gone, oh, the night is still young. And outside is the dawn, warm and welcome the touch. The birds do sing and cheer of gay and happy things, though I can't hear them here, the laughter in the morning sun. Merry to some, but for me, oh, the night is still so young. And that is the poem, The Night is Young. I wrote that back when I was in college, I believe. No, I was just finishing up my master's, I believe, and I wrote this after I had taken a poetry course. And some people, I think, misunderstood this poem. Jay got it. Jay actually got it the first time he heard it. He understood what it was. It's a song about depression. It's a song about anxiety and fear. He actually caught that very quickly. But a lot of people just caught it and said, oh, it's a poem about hope. It's a poem about, joy and, the beauty of things. Like, no, it's a poem about depression. So some of y'all may see where I'm coming there. Some of you may not, but that is what the poem is about. The night is young. All right. So now we shall go on. I imagine y'all want to finish up New Epic tonight. So we shall do that. We left off on New Epic chapter 30, and we've only got this chapter and one more to go. Hey Aaron, you missed me reading a poem, but that's fine. We're about to jump into new epic now. So let's get to it. New epic, chapter 30, written January 1st, 2021. Titania sat under a large apple tree, watching the halfling village from her seat. Returning to the small town had felt like a breath of fresh air after their brush with the Titan. Blemish, if anything, was even more clingy now than he was before. He rarely left Titania's side and often would slide close to her to talk. She wasn't quite sure how to feel about it. On the one hand, it was excruciatingly annoying. Titania wasn't a mother, wasn't his race, and didn't come from the same world. But at the same time, Titania never found herself capable of pushing him away. The endearing gaze he had for her was almost pleasant at times, and with no one else to talk to that wasn't intimidated by her, it was a welcome reprieve. The halfling still feared the very sight of her, and Blemish for that matter, though he was at least allowed into the village, whereas Titania was only allowed to stay on the outskirts or near the doctor's house. Ezekiel was the only halfling who would speak to Titania directly, but he still rarely made eye contact with her. Upon returning to the village after their adventure, Ezekiel had taken the medicine with glee and rushed to begin treating Mariel. Even with the treatment, though, only time would tell how Mariel recovered. The best thing they could do now was wait. Wait and hope that she woke up. Mom? Titania glanced up. It amazed her how normal that title was starting to feel for her now, and again it made her somewhat uneasy. Blemish was running over, a smile on his face. Hey Mom, Ezekiel says that Mariel's fever's gone down. She's getting better. Good. Maybe when she wakes up we can get out of here, Titania growled. Blemish frowned and sat down in front of Titania, the shade of the tree covering them both. Mom, what's wrong? You seem upset. Titania smiled. Blemish had changed so dramatically since the first time she'd met him. A shy, scared, and lost child with only a killer's intuition as his guide was now more open, hopeful, and even playful. Sure, he was only this way around her, but it was progress, and she couldn't help but feel a little proud of this. I'm not upset, I just don't like it here. But it's a wide open and beautiful land, Blemish pointed out, with people who keep giving me cold glares any time I come near, Titania countered. Blemish shrugged. I'm not bothered, he answered. Well, of course you're not, Titania thought to herself. You're an inquisitorial agent. You've always been used to such things. But then again, the more Titania considered it, she hadn't exactly been well-liked in Orkshire either until she'd helped take down Josiah. Grogner had always been her closest friend, and her heart still hurt at thinking about him. How was that old dwarf doing? Was he safe? Oh, Mom, I meant to tell you. I heard the halflings talking this morning, Blemish cut in. There's been a lot of talk about ambassadors coming from the south. Ambassadors? Titania asked. What's south? A few principalities, but the biggest nation south of here is Calaran, the kingdom of the dwarves, Blemish replied with a shrug. Titania's eyes narrowed and she crossed her arms over her chest, leaning against the trunk. Yes, you mentioned them the other day. Tell me about Calaran, Titania said firmly. Well, I've never been there, but I'll tell you what I've heard. But it's all right. Could I, before I do... Blemish flushed a little red, and Titania rolled her eyes, sliding over slightly and patting the grass next to her. Blemish scurried over and sat next to her, beaming brightly as he felt her arm wrap around him. He lived for this sensation now. Titania just groaned in defeat but didn't object to it. Okay, now, Calaran? Okay, well, apparently not long after the Cataclysm, many of the dwarves in the continent were being sought out and persecuted for the natural affinity for mining, appraisal, and blacksmithing. Most fled west and found refuge in the mountains. There they formed a monarchy called the Kingdom of Calaran, named after the first king. The mountains they made their home in is rich with minerals, ore, and mining deposit, which means that they can dig, mine, and craft to their heart's content. And within 3 years of their settling there, Calaran has curbed the market on metal goods and minerals. Most every nation within the continent requires Calaran for their weapons, metallurgy, and ore. Okay, so they're a powerhouse. Then why trade with the halflings? What do the halflings have? What do they have that Calaran want? Titania asked. I don't know, Blemish frowned thoughtfully. Land. Blemish and Titania glanced up and fast, and to Titania's slight amusement, Blemish's hand was already on his sword. But it was no threat. It was just Ezekiel, standing about 20 feet away from the tree under which they sat. He was frowning in disgruntled irritation, like the idea of being there wasn't a happy one. They want us to stay loyal to them and play the good little spies for their war in Catan Tengre. So the empire to the north, Titania asked. The Catan and Calaran are in competition and war constantly. Our land rests just between a key strategic position for them both. However, we benefit greatly from regular trade deals with the dwarves. In return, anytime the Catan come into our lands, we are duty-bound to keep the dwarves appraised of their actions.
They protect us and keep us supplied, and in return, the halfling lands will act as a buffer to the Catan if they ever try to launch a surprise attack, Ezekiel explained. Titania and Blemish stared silently as he spoke. There was anger in his tone and venom in his voice. Clearly this arrangement didn't sit well with him. So it's a mutual partnership, Titania offered. It's just another form of enslavement. The dwarves know we won't revolt. We can't afford to. We can't leave either because Lovenshire is stuck on the border of the cursed bog, and to go west means running into that monster. The shudder that ran through Ezekiel's spine also ran through Blemish. We just play nice for the time being. Why not just break your end of the deal? Side with the Catan, Titania asked. Because of your kind, Ezekiel hissed, causing Titania's eyes to widen. I beg your pardon, Titania gasped. The Catan hire ogre warbands to act as enforcers. They crush small villages like ours on a whim and have tried to do so to us on several occasions. It's the quick reaction of the dwarves that keep us alive. If it wasn't for them, we'd all be ogre food. Mom isn't like those warbands, Blemish challenged. And while this was certainly true, Titania put a hand on Blemish's head to sit him back down. You think anyone here cares whether she's with the Catan or not? Ezekiel asked. She has the horn, the size, and the skin of an ogre, and that's all anyone in this village really cares about. But you still love me, right? Titania asked with a smirk. Ezekiel glowered but sighed. Look, I'm not callous enough to hate you for what you are, but I also can't blame anyone here for being afraid of you. If you only knew what an ogre warband was capable of. Titania tried to picture about 4 or 5 of herself rushing into a town or village, weapons drawn, and the thoughts, admittedly, gave her pause. Then another thought began to slink its way into her mind. A realization. Wait a second. The dwarves won't like seeing me here, will they? Titania asked. Blemish glanced back at her and then at Ezekiel, starting to draw the conclusion that Titania had. No, they won't, Ezekiel admitted. That's why I came out to see you. Caleron is sending ambassadors here to look things over, and if they find out an ogre is here, they're going to assume you're from the Catan. But Mom isn't with those warbands, Blemish pointed out. It's like I said, friend, for most of us here, all we have to see are the horns, the skin, and the size, and that's all we need to be afraid. Half of the people in town will probably tell them all they want to hear if pushed. So I'm begging you to hide. To get out of the town, go for a town over, go back to the bog, anywhere, Ezekiel pressed. We can't keep you safe, and if we try to, the dwarves won't be merciful. And what about Marielle? Or Blemish? Well, the dwarves won't care much about them, as long as they behave, Ezekiel shrugged. As far as they know, they're both just travelers who need medical attention. Titania growled under her breath. Can we possibly move Marielle? What's her condition? I wouldn't. She still hasn't quite woken up. She's in and out. Moving her might cause more harm than good. And I don't have any weapons, Titania muttered. Mom, I'm not going to let you go again, Blemish snapped. You ran off in the bog before, and that isn't happening this time. Blemish, if you hide with me, then who'll keep an eye on Marielle? Marielle'll be fine. She's with Ezekiel. You put too much faith in me, kid. Besides, you might have a point. Caleron has an unofficial connection to the... He was caught abruptly off as the low tone of a horn could be heard. A long and baritone sound that sent a shiver down Ezekiel's spine. Drat! The ambassadors are nearly here. That horn is for inspection purposes. Inspection? Blemish asked. Well, the ambassadors don't just come to collect goods. They come to verify that everything is safe and orderly. They inspect the town, Ezekiel explained. In other words, they're a mafia. A dwarfish mafia, Titania pointed out. All the more reason for you to get the hell out of here for a day or two, Ezekiel hissed. I'd show you the door, but they're going to get real suspicious of an unconscious elf in my home, and I'm not there taking care of her. Without another word of argument, he turned and ran back towards the town, leaving Titania to climb to her feet. Blemish, I need you to keep an eye on things. Mom, no, I won't. I'm not your mother, Titania snapped. And as of right now, you and I don't know each other. Marielle is your girlfriend. You both escaped from Orkshire and made your way here through the bog. She got sick, and you asked the people here for help. Lose your sword somewhere and pretend you don't know a thing about me, the Inquisition, or that the Titan is west of here. As of now, you are 100% ignorant. Mom, Blemish winced, hating the strict tone she was taking. She turned and started walking to the bog. Blemish, I'm proud of you for finally starting to get over your ties to the Inquisition. But I'm not your substitute. You can't keep clinging to me like a drowning rat, she snapped fiercely. Blemish winced at Titania's side, knowing she was being a bit too strict. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be hurtful, but you really, really need to listen to me now. Stay here and protect Marielle. I'm sorry, Mom. I understand, but You'll be all right without me, Blemish, Titania said encouragingly. You're a clever kid. I mean, you're an archangel. And those are just dwarf mob punks. You're more than any of them could handle. All right, and that is chapter 30 all done. Now we move on to chapter 31. Let's go ahead and get started. No point waiting. This one was written February 8th, 2021. Chapter 31. By the time Ezekiel got back to his home, Mariel was awake and looking around curiously. She caught sight of Ezekiel and tried to sit up, only for him to place a hand on her shoulder and ease her back down. She blinked in surprise and started to ask what was going on, but he held a finger to his mouth for her to be silent. No matter what happens, just go with my lead. If you don't, I can't guarantee your safety, Ezekiel hissed. The assassin is on his way here, and his ogre mother is hiding in the bog. I don't have time to explain, but just behave and do as I do. Mariel nodded her head, unsure of what to do, but simply accepting that she'd been unconscious for too long. After a few agonizing moments of waiting in silence, there came a knocking at the door, which made Ezekiel bolt upright. Hesitantly, he walked to it and opened the door barrier between himself and wondered what he was scared of. And there stood 3 stout dwarves, all having beards almost as impressive as Grognar's, though perhaps more ornate, as there were rings and jewelry tied into the beards. They also weren't wearing the blacksmith tunic, but rather refined and expensive-looking armor. The one in the front, though, looked far more important, with red hair similar to a rose and deep brown eyes. He smiled coldly at Ezekiel and opened his arms as if to embrace him. "Ezekiel, my friend!" the red-headed dwarf cried, with all the joint sincerity of someone definitely not his friend. "Alden, good to see you," Ezekiel replied with a gruff chuckle, though it was clear that he was not at all happy to see Alden. Alden stepped inside and glanced around. "Well, you certainly keep your place nice and tidy. I've always admired that about you, Ezekiel," he beamed, in fact, genuinely this time. "You can tell a lot about someone by the state of their home, and yours shows me you're a man of quality, discipline, order. But I always figured that about you." His eyes then stopped at the bed, seeing Mariel laying on it. He looked up sheepishly, and the dwarf's eyes narrowed. "Why, you didn't tell me you had a new wife, Ezekiel." "She's not my wife." "That was a joke, friend." The word friend spat from his mouth like a poison. The dwarves by the door wearing their fancy armor grabbed their weapons quickly. "But, even though she's not your wife, she's clearly a stranger." "She's a traveler," Ezekiel butted in. "She was traveling with a young man in the bog to escape Orkshire and ended up here. She was sick with an acute infection, and I've been treating her." "Oh, is that so?" Alden asked, his tone softening just so. "A young couple running through the bog to escape Orkshire? Not that I blame your motives. Rumor has it Josiah the Devourer was killed by the Inquisition, which means those nosy bastards are starting to expand their reach." "The Inquisition killed Josiah?" Ezekiel's eyes widened and he shot a surprised look at Mariel. "Yes, it's true. Josiah was killed by an Inquisition agent and an ogre." Alden's face suddenly became very hostile as his eyes darted to Mariel in fear and in anger. The dwarves nearby also got fidgety. "An ogre? Are you quite sure? Were they with a band? A war party?" "No, she was a local ogre that we all met and knew. She lived on the outskirts of town and—" "Mariel!" A new voice cut in, and Mariel was pleased to see Blemish run inside and stand beside her, taking her hand. Alden didn't look pleased about being interrupted this way, but he didn't object. At least this way Ezekiel's story was being corroborated. "I take it you're her friend from Orkshire?" Alden asked. "I am. She and I are very close, right?" Blemish asked. Mariel quickly nodded, taking the hint. "I'm so glad to see you're getting better," Blemish added. "Yeah, I'll be ready to leave in no time." "Leave?" Alden asked. "And why would you want to leave at all? A couple of lovebirds like you, escaping from Orkshire and the Inquisition? Certainly you wouldn't object to settling down in a peaceful place like this. I mean, where would you go?" Ezekiel shot a glare at Blemish and Mariel, not to say anything that might set off Alden. But without knowing what to say, Mariel blurted out her first thought. "We want to go to Nirvana," she cried. There was a long silence that fell over the room until Alden burst out with a loud and hearty laugh. Ezekiel looked away darkly while Alden had his laugh at Mariel's expense. "You can't be serious. You intend to go to the east to find Nirvana? I suppose it's true that people will do anything when they're in love." Don't say you don't believe it's real, Muriel retorted, blushing fiercely at being laughed at.
Don't be stupid, girl. Of course Nirvana is real.
This was not the answer that anyone had expected. Both Blemish and Muriel's eyes widened at the sound of this revelation, and Muriel sat up. Wait, Nirvana's real?
Just past the Valimar Republic, in fact, Alden explained. But you'd be foolish to go there. Suicidal, perhaps.
But it's a utopia. Everyone lives in peace there.
If you truly believe that, Alden chuckled, then you're more childish than I thought.
He shook his head and turned away.
I'd take some time to educate these two lovebirds before you let them run off to their deaths. In the meantime, Ezekiel, I'm sure you won't mind if we do our inspection now.
Of course I mind, Ezekiel growled, but that's never stopped you before, has it?
Now see, Alden snickered, that's why I like you, Ezekiel. You understand the pecking order.
And without another word, the dwarf marched out with his posse to begin their inspection of the town. With the door closed, Ezekiel breathed a shuddered sigh of relief. Thank goodness. What did he mean about the utopia? Nirvana is real, right? He said it was real. Oh, of course the Nirvana utopia is real, Ezekiel grumbled. But he's right that it's dangerous to try and go there. Why? Muriel asked. What's so dangerous? Listen, Ezekiel tried to explain. This world, ever since the cataclysm, it's become sick. Some folks think it's a new beginning or a brand new era to something better, but if you take a look around long enough, you start to realize that everything, all of this, it's a sickness. Humans transforming into monsters and fantasy creatures, brothers and sisters butchering each other in the streets over tribalistic disputes, old world governments rising up out of the ether to try and restore a semblance of order. It's all sickness. All of it is sick. Even if this utopia is everything we have heard it to be, which I highly doubt, just trying to cross the Valimar lands will be more than you can handle. Valimar has suffered greatly due to the cataclysm, and its people reflect it. You'll be attacked, belittled, executed, sacrificed. Valimar is a testament to how sick this world really is. Blemish frowned thoughtfully at this explanation and gave a slow but meaningful nod of understanding. I've only been to Valimar once, and I didn't like it when I was there either, Blemish said. It doesn't matter, Muriel cried. If Valimar's dangerous, then we'll find a way through it anyway. We have an ogre on our side. One ogre won't make a difference in that place, nor will Inquisitor agents. Ezekiel's eyes shot to Blemish, and Blemish felt that Ezekiel had pieced together who had been the one to kill Josiah. It's not my job to tell you what to do with your lives, so do as you please, but know that I warned you. He turned around and walked to the door. Well, if you're that annoying, we can leave tonight. No, Ezekiel answered. The inspection will go on for at least 2 or 3 days. If you leave in the middle of it, they might tail you and find your ogre friend. I'm a bit confused by all this. Muriel looked hopelessly to Blemish, who shrugged. I'll explain later, he assured her. Where's Titania? Muriel asked. I said I'd explain later, Blemish repeated, but for now, we're okay. For now. That's the magical word for you. Those 2 words. I don't know what the inspectors will want with you two, but you're definitely out of the ordinary, and I know that Orkshire will be a topic of discussion for them. Why? What do the dwarves want with Orkshire? Muriel asked. Orkshire might just be beyond the bog, but it's still a key location between the Catan and Calaran. Josiah the Devourer was able to keep both at bay with his massive orc army. But now with the Inquisition trying to take hold of it, maybe Calaran is going to make a play. The Calaran Kingdom fighting the Inquisition? Blemish says. That would be nothing short of disastrous, exactly. Which is why I don't know if they'll fight or if they'll just make a deal with them. Either way, Josiah's death is going to make waves, Ezekiel answered. Blemish and Muriel glanced at each other fearfully. Lovenshire had just become incredibly dangerous, especially if they discovered who Blemish really is, or if they found Titania. All right, and that is chapter 31. Completely unrelated. When is the Heroes of History coming out for the Varangian Guard? You're right, Johnny. That is completely unrelated. Yeah, I agree with you on that.
In answer to the question, I don't know yet. I'm still writing the script, and I normally don't release it until I reach Rep 5 with the hero, and right now I'm Rep 4. I will try to write more of New Epoch in the future. Well, since we just finished that story, my challenge to you guys that are listening right now, if you would go to the comments section either now or at the end of the video and type what you liked about New Epoch and whether or not you'd like to see me continue it, because I'd love to see your comments down below. Comments help the algorithm even more than chat messages do. So, just let me know. How do you level so fast? I play the game a lot. All right. Before we go on to the next story, we'll decide whether or not it's going to be Monster Club or Raptors. But first, I'm going to read another short story to you. It was a story requested by Hannah herself. It's called Caiaphas Cain, The Greatest Challenge. Now, I want to give a little bit of perspective on this. Most of you are probably not familiar with Caiaphas Cain or where he's from, but he is a Warhammer 40k character. Caiaphas Cain is a commissar, which basically means that he's an officer who's in charge of keeping tabs on soldiers under his retinue. It's a science fiction kind of setup. And Hannah made a bit of a challenge to me. She wanted me to make a story about Caiaphas Cain in a very unique way. And so I accepted the challenge, and now I will share with you the result. This is a Caiaphas Cain short story called The Greatest Challenge. I wrote it on October 3rd, 2023, so it's actually pretty recent. All right, here we go. Caiaphas Cain, The Greatest Challenge. In my long and admittedly ignominious career in the loyal service of the Imperium, I feel it fair to state that I've confronted every trial that can be confronted by a citizen of His Majesty. Demons, Warpspawn, Necrons, Eldar, both tainted and free of corruption, Tau, Chaos Cultists, Orcs, and of course Tyranids. In every circumstance, I found myself confronted by death, and worse, yet always somehow able to wiggle my way out of trouble and destruction thanks in no small part to my natural gift at survival, manipulation, and a certain degree of luck. It was bound to happen that, at some point in my life, I'd be forced to confront a challenge I simply couldn't wiggle out of. Of course, this challenge did present itself upon me in the most unexpected of ways, and, as fate would have it, and Emperor knows I should have expected, it was a trial I ended up bringing upon myself. I was in my final few years of service with the 597th Valhallan Regiment. We had recently been stationed on a world that we had been instructed to free from a particularly nasty gene stealer infestation. Thankfully, we were in the final stages of cleanup. It was a really simple matter. In the usual course of events, the Guard is only needed to break the back and spear to the main force of enemies, and then it's left to the RBTs and PDF to complete the process of cleansing the planet of the taint. So it was with that in mind that I was enjoying a very relaxing bowl of Tana in my office. Office is perhaps a strong word for it. It was the most well-accommodating room my aide Gunnar Jurgen could acquire for me when we made it to the planet side. Big enough to feel comfortable, but with no windows or natural lighting, it felt something like a bunker or jail cell. But then I detected the pungent odor of unwashed socks entering the room. Commissar? Jurgen had approached my desk without me seeing him and was doing a salute that would make a regiment sergeant cringe. But for him, it was likely the best he could muster. He was wearing his fatigues, which, like everything else he wore, never seemed to fit him quite right. He had his jaw set, and there was a familiar hint of unentertained glee in his eyes, like when he was caught sight of a new porno slate. "What is it, Jurgen?" I asked, sitting down my bowl curiously. "You have a visitor, sir. Miss Amberly Vale, sir." It was quite a good thing I'd set down my bowl. As I'd been holding it, the shock would have been made it to drop. "Where?" I asked, my voice rising a little. "Outside, sir. She's come requesting to see you, in private." "Well, Emperor's blood, man, let her in," I said, quickly adjusting my coat and brushing my hair with my fingers. "Very good, sir."
He then hobbled off to go and open the door for the Inquisitor. I puffed myself up a little, made sure that all the right buttons were in place, and then smiled as I turned towards the door again to see Amberly. She strode in with the elegance I always expected of her, as if this room was no less home to her than her own childhood bedroom. She looked around with a grin that was filled with amusement and coy interest. Her blonde hair was free, framing her face, contrasting her blue eyes that shone just as brightly as the day we met on Gravelax. She was wearing her Inquisitor clothing, which oddly was uncommon for her. Unlike many Inquisitors who took such a liking to the status, they couldn't resist strutting around like a peacock wherever they went. Amberly was one of the rare few who seemed far more comfortable slipping into roles and performances like any other woman might enjoy slipping into new clothing. Though I had learned, over our long association, you could be just as cold and lethal as any other Inquisitor, as she saw fit to remind me on more than a few occasions. So, while I was certainly enamored to see her beautiful smile again, I felt my body tense somewhat as if bracing for an unpleasant Valhallan shower. Her eyes fell on me, and that mischievous twinkle suddenly dazzled them, which, to my horror, made the palms of my hands start to itch. Whatever she was here for, it was more than just a social call, and I was sure I wasn't going to like it. "Caiaphas, is this what passes for an office of a hero of the Imperium?" she asked pleasantly. I admit I'm not quite used to these accommodations yet myself, but needs must, as they say. We stood and admired each other a moment. I shot a single glance at Jurgen and nodded for him to leave. If Amberly wanted a private conversation, she'd get one, and that meant all listening ears had to be scarce. With another sloppy salute, Jurgen left the room. Despite him being gone, I still felt like I was being observed by a third party, and it took me a few moments to realize where that set of eyes was located. Amberly adjusted her coat somewhat, and it was then I saw her. A small girl, barely about 8 Terran years old, if that, huddled behind Amberly and gazing up at me with the widest blue eyes. She had dark brown hair that fell just to her neck, and a rounded face with giant freckles poking about her cheeks. Her tiny hands gripped Amberly's coat nervously, and my eyes darted back between her and Amberly. The child wore simple clothing, and I saw a small piece of plastic at her hip. What appeared to be a toy chainsaw that juvies would toy with in between classes at the Schola. Amberly, catching my sight of my gaze, smiled wider. I suppose we get straight to business then, she shrugged. It's a shame I don't have more time to converse with you, but, as you said, needs must. Quite, I answered, my eyes returning to the girl, who swiftly disappeared behind Amberly's coat. Her eyes seemed familiar somehow, as if I'd seen them before. As you no doubt have surmised, Amberly went on, I'm here about this young lady. She indicated the child. My first thought was that perhaps the girl was a psyker, or perhaps another blank, like Jurgen. No, I told myself that would be unlikely. Not only are blanks exceptionally rare, but Amberly would never be so careless as to drag one around with her in public. Yes, I was going to ask, I started, before suddenly my itching palms began to fire up again. It was her eyes. Something about them started my hands twitching, and I just knew there was something about them that I recognized. Until at long last, as I looked up at Amberly again, the resemblance hit me like a charging grox. Do you recall our first night together on Pereira Munda? She asked, the mischievous look in her blue eyes dancing as my hands were now practically shivering. Of course, I answered, working to keep my voice steady. Indeed. Well, I'm pleased to introduce you to Caitlin, my daughter, and yours. If you've ever tried walking down a flight of stairs only to miscalculate the distance and miss a step, you'll know the exact feeling of shock, terror, and sinking that just washed over me at this news. Now I'll be the first to admit that I'm not as pure as perhaps is expected of a man of my considerable reputation, but when you're the hero of the Imperium, you tend to attract quite a lot of feminine company. And I confess there have been a number of women I can claim that I've bedded with at some time or another, but I've always known those jaunts, as lovely as they were hardly things that I believed would prove to be consequential. But I have not taken into account how my relationship with Amberly might turn out, and that sudden understanding nearly made my knees buckle. My daughter, I gasped, finally remembering my words. Oh, yes, Amberly sighed with a sense of satisfaction, my reaction undoubtedly all the fun she sought from this revelation. Caitlin, would you like to say hello to your papa? At the suggestion, the child stepped out from behind Amberly and immediately ran to me with haste I scarcely expected. Papa, she squealed, hugging my leg like a Terran squirrel. I stared at her in surprise and felt my whole body go tense. I didn't budge an inch as she held onto my leg, and I looked dumbfounded, I'm sure. It's not exactly an easy prospect to wake up and realize you're the father of a little girl. She looked up at me with big blue eyes that I now recognized distinctly as Amberly's.
Caitlin, I began. A pleasure.
Papa, Mama told me all about you, she cried.
Did she? I asked, looking up at Amberly, who was grinning from ear to ear. And what did she say?
She said that you're the hero of the Imperium, that you fought all the big bad monsters of the galaxy and beat them all.
Right. And Amberly, would you, I looked up at Amberly pleadingly. I had no idea how to handle this. A mess hall of ravenous guardsmen, a mob of angry orcs, a hacked-off demon host. Those things I could handle. I taught no higher than my knee calling me Papa. I almost prefer the orcs. Well, maybe it wasn't that bad, but you get the idea.
Come now, Caitlin. Your Papa is a very busy commissar. With a sigh of relief, I felt Caitlin release me and toddle back to Amberly, though she was now beaming at me excitedly. And I know he's looking forward to watching you for the next few days.
I'm what? I asked, my heart plummeting at the sound of this notion.
I'm afraid I have some urgent business to contend with. Nothing like threatening. Well, not for me, at least, she said with that same dazzle in her eyes that sent a chill down my spine. And it would be very unhelpful to have her along for the trip. Therefore, I thought it might do her some good to get to know her father a little.
But, now hold on, I started to argue, but
Amberly's smile thinned a little as her eyes shot momentarily to the girl. It was clear she didn't want to hear any objections around the child, and I had to agree that might only upset her.
Well, of course I would be delighted, Miss Vale, but I'm concerned for her well-being around the guard. They aren't used to Jews running around.
As their commissar, I'm sure that they'll learn to adjust or face summary execution, Amberly smiled. And she was right, too. As a commissar, I had the authority to shoot anyone who disobeyed my authority, and hurting my own daughter would most certainly classify as such. The problem is that I do my best to avoid such punishments, as it only adds friction to my already troubled job. Against all odds, and with no small help from my ability to give an impression of concern for the common trooper, I'd won the trust and admiration of the Valhallan 597th, which meant that many of the soldiers in the regiment saw me as a leader and brother-in-arms more than a figure of discipline and fear. The downside is that there were far more minor infractions and issues to deal with that piled up as the soldiers would often forget that I could, and would, punish insubordination and recklessness. But the benefit to this, however, was that I knew these men and women would watch my back in the thick of the fight, which normally far outweighed the cost of a little extra paperwork I could dump on Jurgen. But now that benefit seemed positively useless in the face of Caitlin, who I knew would be too drunk on my faulty reputation and eager to find all sorts of ways of giving me a headache. And worse, once news got around the regiment about me having a little girl of my own, I'd be the gossip of the entire regiment before dinner. That's the last thing I wanted to stomach, let me tell you. But this was what Amberly wanted, and as the old saying goes, don't argue with an inquisitor. Ever. Not the most poetic of sayings, but surely the most honest and blunt I can ever put into words. I quickly decided it was best to do something about Caitlin now so I could talk to Amberly privately. I knelt down to be on eye level with the child. I've always been rather amiable with children, but the fact that she was my own made things somewhat awkward. So, Caitlin, do you like chocolate? Oh, yes, she cried. Well, I think I have some in my chest over there. Why not go take a look while I, talk to Mother. Yay! Caitlin squealed and rushed past me to search my chest for the chocolate. It was just a few bars I had hidden away, small treats I sometimes had to confiscate as contraband with a squad made a blunder, or if they broke regulations. Emily smiled at her and then at me. She is a sweet girl, you know, she pointed out. I don't doubt it. And she adores you, Amberly added. No, she enjoys the stories you've told her about me, and that's not the same thing. Oh, of that I certainly agree, Amberly whispered, that twinkle in her eyes again. But that's why I think it would be helpful for her to know the real Caiaphas Cain. The real Caiaphas Cain, I asked, shuddering. I don't think that's wise. Cain, Amberly said somewhat somberly. I never once lied to her about who you are. Everything I told her is the truth. Then I'm surprised she hasn't spat in my face, I answered jokingly. I believe you give her and yourself too little credit, Amberly shrugged. I shrugged back meekly. As you say, I answered. And what is this job you're going on, anyway? An Inquisition matter, she answered in that don't bother asking or I'll have you killed tone I was used to. So I nodded judiciously. Well, duty calls, then. It shouldn't take longer than a week or so. And what if the regiment is shipped off-world before you get back? I asked. Caiaphas, do you really think there's anywhere in this galaxy I can't find you? Amberly winked. I felt both warmth and horror at the ramification of those words. She then stepped past me, her gloved hands gently stroking my arm. I know it's sudden, Caiaphas, but I swear to make it up to you later. I'll hold you to that, shall I? I asked, masking my hopeful tone with all my effort. Please do, she winked. Amberly then turned her gaze on Caitlin and knelt down. Now, Caitlin, Mommy has to go. Caitlin beamed and ran to her mother, only to salute. It was about as sloppy as Jurgen's, and yet far more pleasant to look at. Caitlin will be good, Mommy. Emperor as my witness. Now, where did she pick up that phrase? I asked. Couldn't say, Amberly answered. Maybe you should ask her. She ruffled Caitlin's hair before turning to leave. I watched my body stay rooted, but my eyes following her swinging hips and my mind chasing her down the corridor. But all of my senses were brought back as I felt a tugging on my pant leg. Papa? Caitlin squeaked. So what does a commissar do? She asked. Oh, nothing special, I smiled. Commissars have the privilege and duty to oversee the Emperor's soldiers in the guard and enforce discipline, morale, and, From the look on her face, I could see that the child was barely following. This wasn't the right approach. Tell you what, how about if I show you? I'm not entirely sure what possessed me to do this. In retrospect, I imagine I wasn't in my right mind at the time. Inquisitors have a tendency to get you a bit distracted, particularly when they're Amberly. But I found myself walking beside Caitlin down the long alleyways and paths of the warehouse district we had commandeered as barracks on this planet. Soldiers walked by and glanced in my direction, only for their gaze to be dragged sharply down to the little girl toddling at my knees. They would wave at her, only for her to wave back excitedly. I pressed on, a part of me trying to pretend I didn't notice her, and the other part of me constantly checking to make sure she wasn't wandering off. I don't know if any of my readers are parents or not, or if you, like me, had the misfortune of being quite rudely informed of the fact. But if you are, then I'm sure you can perfectly relate to the sudden sensation of absolute anxiety rushing through my body. It was as if Caitlin was more than a child, but an extension of myself as much as my hands or feet. Something I felt should be kept within sight and mind at all times, and protected at all costs. And yet she was not attached to me in any sense I could recognize. Thus, I kept always looking down at her, finding myself feeling rather silly. Ah, Commissar! The familiar sound of a feminine voice met my ear, and I turned slightly to see a flash of red hair and ice-blue eyes walking towards me. Wearing the military vestments of her office, Regina Castine, the colonel and commander of the Valhalla 597th, was approaching. I stopped and smiled at her as she got near. Colonel Castine, surprised to see you out of the command bridge? Not much to do there, I'm afraid. Crew's on cleanup as we get ready to depart, and... She paused at last, taking note of Caitlin standing next to me, and she blinked. Who is this? Ah, I stated, as if it just occurred to me that Caitlin was there. Allow me to introduce Caitlin Kane, my daughter. Whatever she'd expected me to say, Castine certainly wasn't expecting that. As a commanding officer, a colonel had to show composure in every circumstance, no matter how desperate or severe. I'd seen this woman face down orc warriors, a wave of Waken Necrons, and an army of Cornate cultists, all with a look of grim determination and tenacity. But now, upon seeing my flesh-and-blood daughter, she quite literally looked as if I'd introduced her to the Emperor himself. Your daughter, she cried. A long story, I explained in a tone that clearly said I'd rather not share it with you now, or ever, and Castine got the message and nodded quickly. Of course, I just, what is she doing here? I'm watching her for a while. Her mother's away on business, and I suppose she just wanted to spend time with her father, I replied blandly. Caitlin kept staring between me and the colonel before finally speaking up. Do you work for my papa? She asked. Oh, no, sweetheart, Castine replied shyly. We work together. But commissars, they boss people around, right? Does Papa boss you around? Only when I have to, I chuckled, kneeling down to close our level. Caitlin, this is Colonel Castine. She's in charge of all the soldiers you've seen walking around. They're Valhallans, Caitlin cried. That took me by surprise. I don't mind admitting it. Now, how did you know that? Mommy told me that you work with Valhallans. They're Ice World fighters. I smirked to myself. Amberly was already getting her caught up on Imperial Guard regiments. Not bad. Do you know much about Valhallan fighters? Castine asked. No, ma'am, she answered. But I know a lot about Papa. He's the Imperium hero. And that he is, Castine answered with a smile, and we're very lucky to have him. Do you want to be a commissar too when you're grown up? I'm sure Castine was asking out of politeness, but I dare say I hope she said no to that question. The thought of her going into the commissariat to be stationed with some regiment thinking she'd have my reputation and skill just because of her family line? Not if I could help it. I don't know, Caitlin answered. Papa's job seems really important, but it'll be hard work. I was pleasantly surprised. Despite her youth, she seemed quite intuitive. Commissar's gotta keep law and keep morale. That's morale, sweetie, I answered. But it's a difficult burden. Caitlin nodded. So, maybe I'd be an inquisitor like Mommy. I don't think the sudden arrival of the Emperor himself would have been as blood-curdling as what she just said. Fracking warp. The girl just had to say that. Castine's reaction was about what I expected as well. A mixture of confusion first, realization, shock, horror, and then Emperor Damitol absolute admiration. Caiaphas, you actually quite, I said firmly with an attempt to keep my voice level. And so far as we're concerned, that information is strictly confidential, Colonel. Is that clear? I said coldly. As a commissar, my authority was outside the standard protocol and Guard's regulations. It was my job to assure that rules and morale was maintained, and that meant I was well within my authority to shoot any guardsman for whatever reason I found necessary. And I made it a point not to exercise this authority all too often, as it undermined the illusion that I care about the average trooper, and the last soldier I'd ever want to shoot was Castine herself. But if word spread that I did not only have a child with a mysterious woman, but that woman happened to be a member of the Inquisition, the scandal that would cause would utterly destroy me, my reputation, and also make me a target of Amberley's enemies or other Inquisitor agents. Not that these two categories are always mutually exclusive. To protect my own skin and keep the secret safe, Castine could and would be a casualty if necessary. Of course, I had no desire to do this, but the tone of my voice was all she needed to understand that this possibility was certainly not off the table. Of course, Commissar, Castine said quickly, thankfully recognizing the seriousness of the situation. Wouldn't want to let that information out. No, we would not. I then looked at Caitlin. Caitlin, dear, you can't talk about what Mommy does here or anywhere, understand? But why not? What Mommy does is very secret, and if people knew, it could hurt her. Well, rather, it could hurt me, which was the important thing, but she didn't need to know that. Okay, Caitlin said, disappointment evident in her voice. Don't worry, I whispered. I know she's proud of you. Are you proud, Papa? She asked. I smiled a moment, contemplating the question. Proud? I wasn't sure if I was or not. The part of me that wanted to forget she even existed was still telling me that I shouldn't get too involved with Caitlin. And yet, there was that other voice. That voice that filled me up inside when I looked at her. I reached down and took the cap of my head and put it on hers, letting the brim sink below to cover her eyes. Despite her eyes being hidden, her smile only widened as she squealed, feeling my cap on her head. That hat of not just the Imperium's hero, but hers. Of course I'm proud of you, I whispered, as should any father. All right, and that was the greatest challenge. And for those who do not know, Hannah actually drew an image of Caitlin. I will put it up on the screen for y'all to see. Once I pull it up, of course. There we go. I'll shrink it down a bit. There we go. That is Caitlin. Give me part 2. I am still working on part 2.
One of the things I like about the Caiaphas Cain stories is that they are a lot lighter than what you'd expect for the Warhammer 40k universe. So I do like that. Alright, well, with that all out of the way, we take a drink and then we can decide what we read next. Alright, let's go ahead and delete that now that we've done that. Well, I just love how she said that. Just I want to be Inquisitor like Mama, because here's the thing. What was shocking about that is her not saying she wanted to be an Inquisitor, but the fact that she admitted that her mother was an Inquisitor, which means Caiaphas Cain tapped an Inquisitor, which, yeah, that look, I don't care how cool you are as a Space Marine. If Caiaphas Cain sits around with 3 Space Marines, the first one says, I beat 20 Eldar by myself with just melee combat. Another says, I took on a demon by myself and knocked its ass back into the warp. The other says, I fought a Primarch myself and lived through it. All Caiaphas has to do is say, I banged an Inquisitor. Every single one of them drops what they said. No! What? You gotta tell me. They need to know. Alright, anyway. So, the question now is, do we read Monster Club or Raptors next? That is the question. The reason I asked is because some folks don't seem as invested in the Monster Club, and I don't blame you entirely. Monster Club, while it's one of my favorite stories that I ever wrote, it is an older story, so you definitely notice that my writing in it is not as good. And so if y'all are like, you know what, Raven, this writing isn't as good as your latest writing, I understand, and I will stop reading it if that's what you want, but I want to ask first. So we've got Monster Club, Raptors, Monster Club, so 2 Monster Clubs, 3 Monster Clubs. Finish Monster Club? Oh, we're nowhere close to finish. Monster Club's a long one. Because I think we left off on chapter 10, and there are a total of 56 chapters. So we've got a long way to go in Monster Club. Alright, looks like a lot of people are wanting the Monster Club. Okay, that's fine. Alright, Monster Club Chapter 10. I wrote this March 4th, 2013. Alright, here we go. Dinner had been quiet. No one really spoke as they ate. Abraham sat in silence as he could only watch and observe everyone else eat. Only Asher and Katie had been absent from the table. Asher was in a room resting, as he had expended a lot of power earlier, and Katie was in her room, still sleeping off her injuries. Everyone else at the table barely touched their food. None were very hungry after witnessing Asher feed on the Dawnbringer assassin, Warren. Even Solomon, who was always uplifting and upbeat, had a dark look across his face the entire time. Now Abraham was sitting on the couch in the den. He was staring off into space and trying hard to wrap his mind around everything that had taken place in the past few hours. Katie, the lost Lamia, had returned to them. The Dawnbringers had sent a pair of killers to their home, and Asher had killed both, feeding on one. What else could have happened before he went to bed that night? Abraham? Abraham whirled around to see Michelle behind him. Next to her stood Sarah, who was looking down nervously. We need to talk to you. Sure. What's wrong? Not here. You need to come with us, Sarah whispered. She and Michelle turned and walked to the porch door, where they pushed open the doors and rushed out into the yard. Abraham stood up and hurried after them, following them into the middle of the grass. The moon was still out, and the sky was a beautiful deep indigo. The stars above twinkled merrily, as if none of the horrors that had been witnessed earlier had ever happened. Michelle and Sarah stopped in the middle of the yard and turned to face Abraham. He paused and looked around at them. Okay, what did you want to talk about out here? Abraham asked. We wanted privacy, Michelle explained. Now listen close, because we've got a lot to tell you and don't have a long time to tell it. We'll talk, you'll listen. Okay? Abraham was taken aback by Michelle's attitude. It wasn't her normal tough and can-do sort of persona, but more like a nervous and anxiety-filled voice. All right, I'm listening, Abraham said.
Michelle sighed and looked to Sarah, who gave her a nod, and Michelle faced Abraham again. You need to stay away from Katie as best you can. What? Abraham asked. You heard me, Michelle snapped. What did I do wrong? Does she hate me or something? Sarah stepped forward, her eyes red and filled with sadness. Oh, it's nothing you did, Abraham, she said reassuringly. We trust you, and we know that you wouldn't do anything to hurt anyone here. But Katie doesn't see it that way, Michelle interjected forcefully. She doesn't trust men. But she gets along with Asher and Tamil just fine, Abraham pointed out defensively. Only somewhat, Michelle explained. Asher and Tamil aren't human, so she trusts them a bit more, but you? Fine, I'm human, Abraham growled, so she hates human men. Sarah and Michelle both nodded. Abraham groaned and stared up at the sky. Okay, so fine, what do I do? What can I do? You just stay clear of her for a while. For her safety and yours, try not to be in the same room with her alone, Michelle said forcefully. We'll talk to her and try to help her understand why you're here, but until then, she's only going to see you as a threat, Sarah finished. Why does she hate human men? Abraham asked. Michelle and Sarah exchanged a glance with each other and looked down, Michelle's stern attitude dissipating. How much do you know about Lamia? Michelle asked. Up until now, I'd never seen one or heard of them, Abraham admitted. Then I don't think you'd understand if we tried to explain, Michelle said darkly. In time, maybe Katie will tell you herself, but it's not our right to tell you that. Michelle walked around Abraham and back to the house. Look, just be careful, Abraham, for your own sake. I know you're all in the same house, so you're eventually going to cross paths at one point, but just give her a wide berth. Either way, I'm going to go to bed. I'm exhausted, and today really was messed up. She then dashed back to the house and into away from the yard, leaving Abraham with Sarah. Sarah had a sad look across her face as she started to head back inside. Sarah? Abraham asked. Solomon said that Katie's like a sister to you. Why? Sarah's body stiffened and she shivered. Calypso and Katie and I are the only ones here who were born the way that we are, Sarah choked. Abraham could hear the tears behind her words. Asher was once human, and so was Michelle, Tamil, and Solomon. Calypso was born a mermaid, but she lived on the other side of the world. Katie and I, we met before we came to the Monster Club, and we understood each other. We looked out for one another. Abraham listened to her and couldn't help but feel a sense of sympathy for Sarah and for Katie as well. I'm sorry. It's all right, Sarah said, turning and trying to regain her composure and charm. She brushed her hair back behind her ear and grinned. Regardless, we need to find you a new place to sleep at night, don't we? Abraham suddenly slapped his forehead with his palm. He'd forgotten that Katie would be moving back into her own room, which left him with no place to sleep. Oh, yeah, I guess I can sleep in the den for now, Abraham said. Sarah gasped. Oh, no, absolutely not. Sarah shook her head furiously. How about if you sleep in my room? I can make you a bed out of webbing and everything. Probably not a good plan. Sarah and Abraham turned around to the house to see Tamil standing up and against the wall, staring off into space. He couldn't see them through his glassy eyes, but he could hear them just fine, and he seemed amused. He had a small grin on his face. You sleep in Sarah's room, you not get out again. Sarah flushed and scowled at Tamil. I'd clean the webs off the floor for him, Tamil. Actually, Tamil has a point, Abraham said kindly, putting a hand on Sarah's shoulder. Maybe it would be better if I slept in Asher's room. He's always out for the evening, so it wouldn't be a bother. No, Asher doesn't like other people in his room, Sarah said. Besides, he might be tempted to feed on you if you stay in his room. Abraham shivered a little at that thought and placed his hand on his neck, imagining Asher's fangs ripping into his neck. He grimaced and shook his head, trying to rid himself of that thought. My room have space, Tamil offered. Sarah suddenly brightened. Now there's an idea, she said happily. How do you like to room with Tamil for a while? Abraham considered that thought and shrugged. Yeah, I guess that sounds fine to me as long as you're okay with it. I just need to get my clothes and move them to Tamil's room. Abraham moved past Sarah and Tamil and made his way up into the house. Tamil followed after him towards his room, likely to make space for Abraham. Abraham moved quietly to his old room and then paused. Katie should be asleep right now, and wouldn't be a problem. All he needed to do was slip in, grab a change of clothes, move them to Tamil's room, and that would be it. It shouldn't be a problem. With a small nudge, he pushed open the door and stepped inside. Katie? He peeked in and saw that Katie was fast asleep in bed. She didn't move or even open her eyes as he tiptoed inside. He crept past the bed and the chest of drawers. He grabbed the stack of clothes that were his and made sure he got everything. Okay, All right, that should be... There was a furious hissing sound as Abraham was thrown to the ground. He felt a long and scaly mass slam on top of him. He looked up to see Katie, wide awake and furious, laying on top of him, staring at him with golden, serpentine eyes that were filled with rage. She looked beautiful, and her body looked completely healed. There wasn't a scratch or injury on her anymore. How had she healed so fast? Katie! Abraham grunted, having trouble breathing. Shut up! She spat. Abraham could hear a slight accent to her voice, and he realized that she was Indian after him. All men lie. Now shut your lying mouth! Katie reared back her head like a cobra prepared to strike. Her long, dark hair silhouetted against her almost like a cobra's hood. Stop! Abraham screamed. As if prepared for the worst, the door burst open. Tamil stumbled in blindly through the open door, and Asher right behind him. Asher took one look at Katie and acted instantly. Tamil rushed forward and threw himself in the way of Katie. Unable to stop herself, she struck and sunk her fangs deep into Tamil's shoulder. Tamil let out a cry of pain and fell backwards. Suddenly, Asher dashed to Tamil's side and grabbed Katie using one hand, pushing her off of Tamil and back to the bed. Before she could say or do anything, Asher's eyes suddenly glowed a very familiar red. Abraham turned away so that he wouldn't be caught in Asher's gaze, but Katie was already locking eyes with the vampire, her eyes glazing over and her body going limp. Sleep, Asher commanded. Without a moment's hesitation or a second thought, Katie collapsed on the bed, unconscious and breathing softly. Asher stepped back and made sure that she was asleep. What the hell were you thinking? Asher spat. I looked at her bed. She was asleep, I swear. Asher walked around the bed and looked to see what was in it. He pulled out something long and snake-like, but it was see-through and looked badly beaten and torn. It wasn't her, Asher growled. It was her skin. What? Lamia heal wounds by shedding their skin. She must have been shedding it while we were all eating, Asher growled. That's what you saw. Asher turned and pulled Tamil and Abraham to their feet. You're real lucky, Abraham. Lamia venom's extremely toxic. You could have been dead in minutes. Suddenly, Abraham spun to face Tamil, who had the puncture wounds in his shoulder from Katie's bite. Tamil was bitten, Abraham cried. Tamil burst out laughing. It's okay. I already dead. Poison does not hurt me. Tamil rubbed his shoulder and placed his hand around Abraham's shoulders. I got room cleared up for you. Asher helped. Just as he said this, Sarah and Calypso came into the room. We heard Abraham scream. Is everything all right? Sarah asked. Yeah, we're fine, Asher answered quickly. Sarah looked towards Katie's sleeping body and then at Tamil's shoulder. She moaned and shook her head, realizing what had happened. I'll talk to her when she wakes up, Sarah said. She needs to trust Abraham or we'll never have peace in this house. It can wait for now, Sarah, Calypso pointed out. Don't beat yourself up over this. Calypso reassured her. Sarah smiled, but her face was downcast. Calypso moved to Asher's side to help him move Katie's body back onto the bed and under the sheets. Tamil reached his hand out to touch Abraham's shoulder so that Abraham could walk him out of the room. Are you sure you're okay, Tamil? Maybe Calypso should look at your wound, Abraham offered. Tamil waved it off and continued with Abraham to his room. Takes much to hurt me, Tamil chuckled. Problem is, cannot see. Need help finding way back to room. Sarah scurried up past him and stopped at Tamil's room. Abraham, I want you to see this. She opened up the door for Abraham and Tamil to walk in. When Abraham saw the room, he gasped. The walls were a sandy color, and it looked like strange etchings had been made on the walls, kind of like symbols. Had Tamil made them himself? There was a sarcophagus by the wall, but it looked awful big to hold Tamil's smaller body. Abraham scanned the far corner of the room and saw a twin-sized bed. Abraham smiled, realizing that Tamil likely slept there. Tamil wandered into the room. He moved with ease and speed like one with perfect sight. It was likely that Tamil was familiar enough with his room that he didn't need to see anything to navigate through it. Tamil sat down on his bed and stared off blankly. Do you like what you're sleeping? Sarah asked. Abraham looked to the other side of the room and suddenly groaned under his breath. The corner of the room had been covered in what looked like a hammock of silk and webbing. Sarah must have built that for him. It's nice, Abraham muttered. Sarah gave a small hurt look. You don't like it? No, it's not that, Abraham shouted quickly. I appreciate it, but won't I get stuck in it? Sarah giggled. Oh, no, you won't. I decide when the silk I produce is sticky or not. You can sleep in it just fine until we find you a real bed. Abraham felt skeptical, but shrugged off the suspicion as he was starting to become accustomed to the unexpected. Everything okay in here? Calypso asked, sticking her head in the door. Yeah, we're fine, Sarah laughed. Just getting Abraham accustomed to his new room. Calypso peeked around to see the web hammock and laughed. I should have known. She then turned to face Sarah again. Sarah, I wanted to tell you, Katie is fine. I checked her over and she'll be okay. Sarah breathed out with relief. Oh, thank goodness. Calypso, thank you so much. How's Asher? He's sleepy. Morning is coming, so he's really tired, Calypso said. I'm gonna go check on him real quick. Calypso gave a small blush and then disappeared down the hallway towards Asher's room. Sarah and Tamil both laughed at her behavior, and Abraham only looked between them. What's so funny? Nothing, Tamil replied. Well, I'll leave you two alone now, Sarah chuckled. I've got to go sit with Katie. Abraham got up and ran to the door with her. Can I join you? Sarah stopped and stared at him. After what just happened? Are you sure that's a good idea? I know she hates me, but if I could learn more about her, maybe that could help. Is it okay if I just tag along? I won't even go in the room. I'll stand outside it. Sarah thought for a moment, then shrugged. All right, but just stay quiet and outside the room. The two walked down the hall into Katie's room. Abraham stood by the door, watching as Sarah wandered over to her bed and knelt down on all 8 legs, stroking her hair. She had a very sad look in her eyes. Her normal, cheerful demeanor was gone and replaced with a look of hopelessness. Sarah, are you okay? Abraham asked. Sarah glanced up at him and shook her head sadly as tears streamed down through her eyes. Can I help? No, Abraham, you can't help with this, Sarah said sadly. I'm sorry, Abraham muttered. Sarah smiled, but then went back to looking down at Katie's sleeping form. It's okay, Katie, Sarah whispered. I'm here, just like before. Do you remember? I remember that night so well. The room around Sarah dissolved into memories and thoughts as her memory took her back to that night when she met that scared young Lamia, Katie. And that was chapter 10. Now, chapter 11 is actually what I call one of the memory chapters. Certain chapters throughout the story are flashback chapters that focus on a specific character's memories. So do y'all want me to read the next one, or do you want to stop? All right, looks like people want me to do the next one. All right. Chapter 11, written March 24th, 2013. Sarah's Memory. I could only stand there. I could only watch and listen to them as they pointed and laughed. I was on a stage in front of an audience of people who were all shouting and laughing. The bars of my cage felt so cold and they made me feel so confined. I was dirty and I was freezing. The ringmaster did not consider me human enough to deserve clothes, so all I could do was curl up in my cage, exposing myself to the cold, to the elements, to the crowd of onlookers. The ringmaster was standing on a stage in front of my cage, introducing me to the crowd, but never calling me by any name. The little sign under my cage read, "The Spider Girl." That was my name, as I had not been given a real one. I was not human enough to deserve a name. I had nothing to call myself. When he called his show workers and assistants up to assist him, I shivered and backed as far to the edge of my cave as I could as the 2 show workers came to my cage and opened the door. The crowd in front of the stage leapt and screamed in fear, terrified that I'd leap out and attack, but I wouldn't have, even if I had the strength or desire. My spirit had long since broken, and the show workers knew that. Even so, they put a collar with a long chain around my neck and pulled me out of the cage. Standing in plain view of everyone, my naked body exposed and each of my 8 legs trembling, looking out of the crowd through tear-filled and defeated eyes.
Behold, a true freak of nature, the ringmaster shouted.
I winced at his words. I hated that word. Freak. I hate that word so much. That's all I was to these people, a freak.
She's part spider and part girl. What was God smoking when he made this monstrosity, huh?
The crowd chuckled, but I only sobbed. God hadn't made a mistake with me, had he? Surely I was just as loved as everyone else, right? The ringmaster walked towards me and lifted my dirty white hair back so that my breasts were exposed to the world. I blushed and closed my eyes tightly as I heard the whistling and catcalls.
She's a twisted combination of beauty and beast, wouldn't you say?
The ringmaster continued, egging the crowd on as they laughed and jeered at me. I didn't resist and I didn't speak, for that would earn me a lashing. I'd been part of this freak show for 9 months. I was more than used to this kind of treatment, but that didn't make it any easier.
So what do you think, ladies and gentlemen? Is she a beauty or a beast?
I couldn't bear to hear their answers, and everyone had different answers. I hated all of them. I wasn't a beast, and I wasn't a beauty. I was just me. But I didn't know who me was. I had no name after all. I threw my face into my hands and began to sob into them. I wasn't a freak. I wasn't ugly. I was just... I'm me, I tried to whisper. I wanted to scream it. I wanted to shout it to the world that I was someone. That I had feelings and that I was someone worth knowing, but what would these people know of it? What did they care? To them, my abdomen and 8 legs were enough to earn me the label of freak and to strip me of any title worth remembering. Who was I to them? But just another sideshow attraction. All I could do was keep my face covered by my own hands.
Well, folks, tonight we have a real treat for you, the ringmaster laughed. A new addition to our show that no one has seen before.
I looked up from my hands a little surprised. I hadn't heard about this.
We just picked her up this morning. Bought her off a trader all the way from India.
As he spoke, the assistants were dragging a new cage out onto the stage. I looked inside and saw her. She was young, so scared and very angry. Her tan skin was scarred and her eyes wild and fearful. She thrashed around in her cage, struggling to break free. Her eyes were wild and fearful. Her hair was uncombed and all over. Her arms were tied behind her back. She couldn't swipe at anyone, and when I looked at her waist, I saw the rest of her body was a long snake tail. She was just like me.
Now this is a rare specimen. A half serpent and a half girl. I wonder if she's related to our dear spider here.
I doubted that highly, but one thing I did know was that this girl had known pain and humiliation. She was no stranger to it, and she was about to be paraded in front of all these people like some sort of animal. She didn't deserve it. No one deserved it. And as I thought these things, the men went to her and dragged her from her cage, keeping her shackled by a large chain tied around her neck. She struggled and hissed furiously, trying to fight back. The ringmaster only grinned that same arrogant smirk. He walked closer and leaned into her.
So, why don't you tell us a little something about yourself, freak? He muttered.
She didn't answer. Instead, she bared her fangs at him and gave him such a venomous glare that I could feel her bloodlust from the other side of the stage.
What? Have trouble talking?
The ringmaster leaped back as the girl lashed out, striking like a viper. Her fangs nearly bit into the ringmaster's face. He jerked back with a shock, and the entire audience let out a scream. The ringmaster stared at her angrily and embarrassed.
A fighter, huh? He asked. Well, we can fix that.
I shuddered as I watched him reach for the whip. The dreaded coiling menace that he beat us all into shape with. My back still knew those lashes. Still felt the weight of their sting as they cut into my flesh like a burning fire. This poor girl was about to feel that same suffering, and I could only watch from beside my cage. The whip cracked once, twice, 3 times. I could hear the girl crying in pain, but I refused to look. I turned my head away and winced with each snap of the whip. There was a pause, and I turned to look at the child. She was lying on the ground, her body bleeding steadily. She looked so beaten, so weak, but the ringmaster wasn't done, and I could see it in his eyes. For him, this was less about discipline and more about the entertainment. He enjoyed making us suffer. He got a kick out of bringing us pain. She was down. She was unable to move, and he wouldn't stop. The audience seemed to enjoy it too. But of course they did. We aren't human, so our pain is enjoyable, right? I couldn't take it. I just couldn't stand it. Stop! I screamed. I rushed forward and threw myself over the bleeding girl. The entire audience was in complete and utter shock. Not only had I spoken, but I had run to the aid of another creature, defying my owner. I knew that I would probably be lashed out repeatedly for this, but I couldn't ignore this. I wouldn't let her get hurt anymore. The frightened snake girl stared up at me through pain-filled tears.
What did you just say to me?
The ringmaster spat. That's right, I growled. I can speak. The hideous monster can talk. Does that surprise you? It shouldn't, because you can never seem to shut your mouth, and there's no bigger monster in this whole world than you. I had said it. I had gone too far, and I knew it. I knew that I had done the unthinkable and had brought a world of hurt on myself. I didn't care. I couldn't bear to see this child beaten any more than she already was. She didn't deserve this life. She didn't deserve this treatment. I would gladly stay locked up for the rest of my miserable life if I could see this girl slither away and make a life for herself. Make a real name for herself. Be someone other than a sideshow monstrosity.
How dare you speak to me like that, you ungrateful little...
He didn't finish speaking. He was too furious. I closed my eyes and waited for it to come. And come it did. 1, 2, 4, 8. Eventually, the monster stopped his lashings at 20. I was bleeding so badly that I thought for sure my body had been permanently stained the color crimson. He was breathing heavily and staring over us, growling furiously. I could only lay over the girl, protecting her with my destroyed back.
You're extremely lucky that I need you for the show, the ringmaster spat. You're going in lockup, with no meals for 2 days. Get them both out of here.
The stagehands ran up and lifted the girl and myself back to our cages, toting us off to the stage as the ringmaster tried to restore order in front of his adoring public. I looked toward the girl who was laying in her cage, trying hard to recover from the pain of her own lashing. Are you all right? I whispered to her. She didn't answer me. She simply stared ahead without turning. Do you have a name? I asked. Again, she stayed quiet. I felt so sorry for her. She was repressing, and I couldn't reach her like this. Katie, she finally answered. She had spoken so softly that I thought I hadn't heard her. I looked up and smiled, but the act of smiling was painful too. Katie, it's nice to meet you, I answered weakly. No, it's not, Katie moaned. There's nothing nice about this place or these people. I frowned and reached out my hand through the bars of my cage to her. Still, I'm glad to meet you. Katie stared at my hand and then at me. Why did you help me? She asked. Because I know what it's like to be whipped, and you didn't deserve that. And you do? She asked. I shook my head no, and then she gave me a stern look. Then don't do that again. I don't want you to hurt for me. I smiled and extended my hand further for her to take until my shoulders started to strain. All right, but I still want to help. Katie began to reach for my hand and tried to smile at me, but the pain in her eyes made it hard. What's your name? She asked. I shook my head. I don't have one. I never deserved one. Katie shook her head. No, everyone deserves a name. And I'm calling you Sarah. I stared at Katie for a long time. The back of the stage was empty except for us, and I felt the new presence of that name wash over me. Sarah? I whispered. Katie nodded. I think it sounds nice, and you're nice. I guess there's at least something nice here after all. I felt tears build up in my eyes as she spoke to me. Okay. Sarah it is, I laughed. Then it's nice to meet you, Sarah. She reached out and finally took my hand. We looked each other over and smiled. We were bonded from that moment on. We were friends. We were family. We were all each other had. We were sisters in chains. And that was Chapter 11, Sarah's Memory. Now I'll share something with you guys. Back when I was working on this story with Mika, Mika drew little comics for each of the memory chapters. And this one was no different. So I will share with you the comic that she drew. We may have had our falling out, but there was no question that I appreciated what she did, so I will share with you. This was what she drew. And yes, she did it in a manga format, so you need to read from right to left. Now, granted, I prefer Sarah's new design that Hannah created, but this one was still pretty good. Alright. Hannah's design for Sarah I actually like more. I will show you Hannah's design real quick, since Hannah's here, and I'm sure she'd want me to compare it. I'll remove that now, and I will share with you Hannah's design. One second. There we are. And pull it up. Sorry, give me just a second. This is her newer image. I'll give you a bit more of a zoom in. But yeah, I really like Hannah's new design. Like, I thought Hannah did a really good job with Sarah. So Hannah, if you're still in chat, know that I love your design. And then when the video game was made, when the visual novel was made, of course, my other friend Hannah, or Hannah Valdiabella, who is a really good friend of mine too, she designed the art for Sarah in that game. So obviously, I mean, she had to design the sprite for the game. So with that in mind, I will now show you her sprite. So that is what Sarah looks like in the game. So now you know what Sarah looks like. You've seen all three of her designs. Alright, well, do y'all want to go further into Monster Club, or do you want to stop there? While y'all are thinking it over, let me pull something up real quick, because I can show you something else kind of cool while y'all are thinking about it.
Thought I might as well show y'all this too. 1 second. Some of y'all may want a general idea of something from the game, so let me show you a image from the game. There you go. You can thank Hannah Valdiabella for that one. She did a phenomenal job taking Hannah's designs and making them into a game. You see Sarah, Abraham, Tamil. Oh, that woman in the back, that's Michelle. That is Michelle, the werewolf. And you know what? I mean, I've talked about her a lot. I might as well show you Katie, because we haven't talked much about Katie, have we? Let's show you Katie. I'll show you this real quick and then we'll get back to reading. This is Katie. I went ahead and just showed you her sprite from the game. Oh, show the new Abraham design? Yeah, that's right. Hannah redesigned Abraham too. Let me see if I can find it. Let me see if I can find the redesign. I'm sure it's here. I'm sure I still have it. Let me try to find it. Try to find it. Where, oh where? It's somewhere here. Hold on. I'll find it. I'll find it. These kind of things just go missing sometimes. I don't like it when it does that, but it does happen. Ah, dang it. It's going to pull this bull crap. One second. I have to get to my OneDrive to get access to it. Alright, that fixed it. Okay. Alright, let me take this down. And I'll pull up the new design of Abraham. Yes, that's right. Hannah did do a redesign of Abraham, our main character. And this is it. Oh, there we go. Again, you can thank Hannah for it. And I've been asked what Calypso looks like. Sure, let me pull her up. Calypso looks like this. Alright, so now you have seen that. I think that's it. Oh, well, yeah, I mean, there's Michelle still. Suppose I can show Michelle real fast since we're talking about it. Let's see, Michelle. Where are you hiding? Ah, there she is. There you go. That's Michelle. Well, to be fair, these sprites that you're seeing were drawn by a different Hannah. Hannah did the redesigns of the monster. Actually, let me give you an example of what I mean. I'm going to give you guys a quick example of Hannah's art. So I'm going to pull up two different images. I'm going to demonstrate something here. Because I think it needs to be demonstrated. Where is... Okay, this will work. Wait, no. F. Where is it? Fracking warp. Okay, I know what to do. I hit a little bit of a snag, but we can fix it. One moment. Okay, so to give you guys an idea of the difference between Hannah, Mika, and the other Hannah, here's how it works. So this one second. Okay. This was Asher's original design by Mika. Okay? So this was Asher's original design. We're going to put it over on this side of the screen. Okay? That was the original Asher design by Mika. After Mika and I parted ways and we no longer talked to each other, Hannah came along and redesigned him like this. Now, obviously, it's a little bit less detailed, but she was trying to go through these fast, so you can't blame her for that. Then, after Hannah did her redesign, the other Hannah, the second Hannah, came along, and she wanted to make the video game. So when she made the video game, she took Hannah's original design, our Hannah's original design, and exemplified it into this. So now you can kind of see the difference here. And you can probably guess I much prefer both Hannah's art over Mika's art. Mika's art wasn't bad. It was good. But both of the Hannahs, Hannah Hiring, who's here in the chat, and Hannah Valdiabella, who made the video game, put a lot into making them beautiful. Anyway. Well, let's keep going then. Do y'all want to hear the next Monster Club, or do y'all want to move on to Raptors now? Because we got a little sidetracked, I admit. We call Hannah Valdiabella Turtle sometimes. So more Monster Club. Okay, I got 3 votes for Monster Club. Okay, so we'll do one more Monster Club chapter, and then we will go into Raptor Girls. All right, Monster Club chapter 12. Written April 7th, 2013.
Abraham, you listening?
Michelle asked sharply. Abraham's head snapped up to attention. He'd been so lost in his thoughts that he hadn't heard Michelle speak to him. The entire club was seated at the table, and they were finishing up breakfast. Michelle had apparently been addressing the entire table to give an announcement. Sorry, Abraham replied sheepishly. Just a lot on my mind. A whole week had passed since Katie's return, and Asher had displayed his devastating abilities. For all respects and purposes, it seemed as if the house had returned to normal, for the most part. Living in Tamil's room was nice and quiet, if a little dank. Tamil joked that Abraham didn't need to worry about snoring or noises because it was quiet as a crypt when he slept. Abraham had laughed at this, but the first night that he'd slept in the room, he noticed that Tamil hadn't been joking. The nights in the Monster Club were extremely quiet. Perhaps it was from all the excitement with the return of Katie, but somehow everything seemed deathly quiet at night. Also, to Abraham's surprise, he felt a slight twinge of discomfort whenever Asher was around. Of all the members of the club, it was clear that Asher was the most powerful and deadly, and though he knew Asher was his friend, Abraham couldn't help but feel very uneasy. That night when Asher had fed on the hunter, Warren had horrified him, and he couldn't help but feel as if Asher would just as easily decide to do the same to Abraham. He tried not to let this discomfort show around the others, but it was hard not to wince a little when Asher walked into the room. Abraham couldn't help feeling guilty about these feelings on the matter, and that meant he couldn't tell Michelle about them either, though she often shot him sidelong glances. Well, regardless, I need you to pay attention. Michelle leaned back and looked around at everyone else. Katie was curled up at the far end of the table, unable to sit in a chair. Michelle looked in her direction as she spoke. Katie has now officially recovered, which means that our schedule is going to return to normal from here on out. When she finished saying this, she looked around at everyone inside. Problem is, we've expended most of our medical supplies and food, which means it's time for a store run. There was a murmur around the table at this news. Tamil and Calypso both perked up excitedly, while Asher just shrugged. Sarah and Katie exchanged a look and nodded to each other. Solomon, the only one not at the table, was behind the kitchen counter wiping up some spilled tea.
I'll put together a list of things you'll need to pick up, Solomon said before vanishing into thin air. The rag he'd been using falling on the counter. Abraham couldn't help but notice how unaffected he was at the sight. Rather, he'd grown quite used to such things by now. He watched as the table came alive with movement. Sarah went to the counter and picked up a couple of dish rags and began picking up dishes, while Katie wiped down the tabletop. Asher stood up and nodded at Abraham, causing a shiver to run down his spine, and then made his way upstairs. Calypso watched him go and climbed to her feet as well.
Michelle, I'm going to go get myself ready to go,
she said quickly before hurrying off to her room upstairs. So Michelle, Abraham spoke up, how do you go shopping? What happens? Michelle stared at him and laughed. Sorry, I keep forgetting that you're new to our routine. She stood up and walked to the den, motioning for Abraham to follow. Well, when we go shopping, Tamil, Calypso, and myself go to the store together and pick up whatever Solomon puts on the shopping list. After all, it's his money that we're using to pay for our necessities. Today you'll be coming with us too. It helps to have an extra set of hands. Well, what about Katie, Sarah, and Asher? Abraham asked. Well, Katie and Sarah stick out like a sore thumb, she explained. Usually they'll go down and do something together while we're done near the lake. Asher can't leave the house in the daylight, so he stays here and sleeps or just does his own thing. Abraham nodded in understanding. All right, I'll come with then. So what do I have to bring? Abraham asked.
Nothing, Michelle answered. Just give the rest of us some time to get ready. See what you can do to help out. Actually, go to help Tamil get dressed. He could use that. Abraham stopped and stared. Tamil's gonna get dressed? Abraham gasped. Michelle giggled. Well, of course. What do you think people will say if a full-on mummy just walked into the store? Michelle inquired. Just get going. Abraham nodded and ran upstairs to his room. Tamil was sitting in his bed, staring off into space with a pair of long pants in his hands. He sat up at the sound of Abraham's walking in. Abraham? He asked. You are here to help me? Do you normally need help getting dressed? Abraham asked. Tamil laughed darkly and then shrugged his bandaged shoulders. Do not wear clothes normally, Abraham, Tamil joked. Not used to them. Tamil slipped on the pants over his bandaged legs and began feeling around for the button-down jacket on his bed. Abraham stepped over and picked it up for him. Here, I gotcha. Abraham proceeded to help Tamil find and put on his clothes, which consisted of long jeans, a button-down shirt, a coat, and a hat. He then watched as Tamil carelessly remove some of his bandages from around his head, so that parts of his face were showing. This way, I just look like I get in bad accident, Tamil explained. I can handle rest. Abraham smiled and opened the door to go to the hallway, but was stopped short as he nearly ran into a figure standing in front of him. Whoa! Abraham nearly ran into Michelle. In a hurry? She asked. Sorry, I didn't see. Don't worry about it. Actually, if Tamil's all done with you, can I talk to you for a moment? She said calmly. She walked back down the hallway and past the bathroom where Abraham could hear the shower running. Who's in the shower? Asher's getting one, which is why I wanted to talk to you while he can't hear us, Michelle muttered. She stopped at her room and opened the door, allowing Abraham inside. Abraham walked around and was surprised to see just how nice her room was. It was rather normal looking, but of course Abraham wasn't quite sure what he expected a werewolf room to look like. What do you want to talk about? Abraham asked. Michelle sighed and rubbed the back of her head. All right, I'm gonna give it to you straight. Abraham, I noticed it going on all week. Something's been bothering you, and it has to do with Asher. Abraham stopped and stared at Michelle. How do you know that? Oh, come on. Wolves smell fear, and you stink of it. Abraham moaned and nodded. Okay, yeah, you're right, Abraham said. Abraham, Michelle said kindly, please try to understand. I get how you feel. You're living in a house of monsters, and after the whole thing with Katie and, of course, the Warren incident, I can understand that you're a bit uncomfortable. Really? Abraham asked, relieved that Michelle seemed to understand. Of course, Michelle answered, but you also need to realize that this is what we are. Every night, Asher goes out to feed. He's a vampire. It's what he does. Can you live with that? Abraham looked at his feet and shrugged. I'll try. It's just... He spoke. They heard the water go off in the other room, and Michelle silenced him. Look, we'll discuss this later when we're alone. Let's go downstairs and get ready to leave, please, Michelle hissed. Abraham nodded silently and followed her out the door. Oh, and go make sure Tamil is in disguise, please. Abraham turned and ran to his room to find Tamil, who was now fully dressed and sitting on the bed. Is all well? Tamil asked. Yeah, Abraham answered. We're just getting ready to leave. I wanted to make sure you were ready to go. Tamil stood up and made his way to the door. For being blind, his ability to navigate through his own room was excellent. Not once did he have to slow down or check where he was going. I will see you downstairs then. Tamil stepped carefully around Abraham and out of the hallway. Abraham followed him out when he suddenly heard a voice from downstairs. Are you ready yet? Michelle shouted. I got the list, so we're leaving in 5. As she spoke, Asher stepped out of the bathroom and grimaced. He had on a shirt and boxers, and his body was still a little damp from the shower. You have to howl so loud? Please keep it down. I have a headache. Oh no, don't leave without me, Michelle. There was an exclamation of shock and squeal as Calypso came running out of her room fast, wearing a lovely sundress. She came out too fast to stop herself and tripped over her 2 feet, flying headlong into Asher, who turned just in time to catch her as she slammed into his body. The house went deathly quiet as they looked to see Calypso in Asher's arms, pressed against his body. Calypso hesitantly looked up at Asher, a deep blush on her face. Asher stared down at her, and, to Abraham's surprise, he too was blushing. Hi, Asher stuttered nervously. Hi? Calypso whispered. The two stared awkwardly at each other for a moment before Calypso finally looked down, unable to keep her eyes on Asher's. Are you okay? Asher asked. Calypso nodded in reply, unable to speak. Good, that's good. Abraham couldn't believe what he was saying. This was the same creature that had ruthlessly destroyed a monster hunter and had single-handedly stopped a rampaging werewolf, but he was stuttering and blushing, unsure of what to say, like all this self-confidence had been knocked out of him by Calypso. He looked nervous, embarrassed, downright scared. Calypso wasn't any different. Her blue-tinted face was now glowing a deep red, and she couldn't even make eye contact with the vampire. "Hey, let me know when you two are done making out so we can leave," Michelle laughed from the stairs. "Oh, are those two at it again?" Sierra's voice echoed. "Can I get my camera?" Asher and Calypso both flushed and moved away from each other as they brushed themselves off, trying not to look at each other. "Oh, did they kiss yet?" Tamil asked. "No, but I wish they'd get it over with," Michelle joked, nudging Tamil in the side with a giggle. "Would you both stop?" Calypso whimpered back, clearly embarrassed. She then turned and looked at Asher, but didn't quite make eye contact. Thanks for catching me, Ash," she whispered to him. She opened her mouth as if to say something else, but then squeaked, blushed, and ran off to go downstairs. Asher tried to call back to her, but she was already gone. He groaned under his breath and shot a dirty look at Michelle and Tamil. "Real smooth, guys. Thanks," he snapped, and then turned to go back to his room. Michelle only laughed back. "Yo, Abraham," Michelle chuckled. "Do you think that scene looked a bit like something out of a Twilight movie?" Asher stiffened at this and growled. "Don't get started with me," he snarled. Abraham couldn't help but chuckle a little. Sure, he hated the Twilight series, but he had never considered how a real vampire might feel about that. And to see Asher's response was not only funny, but the truth was that Michelle was right. It did make him think of a Twilight joke. Asher then turned and walked into his room, blushing furiously, as Michelle and Tamil both roared with laughter. Abraham could only smile sheepishly. "Yeah, Asher isn't nearly as mean as he seems. He's actually a big softy for a certain fish," Michelle whispered. "I heard that." Asher's muffled voice came from inside his room. Tamil and Michelle both burst out laughing. "We better go before he goes off on a rant." Michelle took Abraham and Tamil's hands and led them to the stairs where Calypso was waiting for them. Sarah was standing by the door with Katie at her side. They were holding out coats. "It's going to be chilly out there. You'll need to bundle up," Sarah said as she handed Abraham his coat. "And that goes for you too, Michelle," Katie said as she handed a second coat to her. Abraham followed Michelle's lead as he put on the coat given to him. "Thank you very much," Michelle giggled. "I was just getting outside and enjoying the sunshine. It's a beautiful day outside." Katie nodded happily. "That'd be nice," she laughed. Michelle then motioned to the door. "All right, let's get this pack of misfits moving," Michelle called out. Calypso and Tamil both followed with Abraham closely behind them. Michelle had been right. The sun was shining brightly and glowing down on them. The air was alive with a slight breeze as the bushes and trees swayed in its breath. Calypso and Tamil beamed Calypso and Tamil beamed at it while Michelle seemed to be much calmer under the sun's embrace. "This is the nicest weather we've had in a long time," Calypso informed Abraham. "It's a good sign. I think today is going to go perfectly."
All right. And that was chapter 12. And we will leave it there and switch over to the Raptor Girls to round out the evening. All right, we are on Everyday Life with Raptors, Part 9. Everyday Life with Raptors, Part 9, June 18th, 2019.
"I don't like this, Alpha," Charlie muttered, squirming in her suit.
It had been a chore just to convince her to put on the dress blues for court. It was an easy decision to determine which Raptor to bring in besides Blue, but Blue had actually recommended Charlie. Delta was definitely bad news. She wasn't good with authority on the best of days, so being in a courtroom would likely cause more problems. Echo was more mature and level-headed, but had an intense fear of crowds and being judged. She likely would have a panic attack on the stand. Charlie was immature and wild, but was able to handle scrutiny better than the others. She was the only one who might be able to handle the stand, so while Charlie was brought to the city for court, Delta and Echo had remained at the camp until further notice. However, looking professional was not easy for her, considering Owen knew there was nothing at all professional about Charlie.
"Just deal with it a little longer, Charlie," Blue explained.
She was already in her attire and wearing it very well. She had buttoned on her coat and had on the skirt that fell down to her reptilian knees. They didn't bother with her shoes. In fact, the girls never wore shoes. There was no point. Their raptor claws were too large and sharp to handle any form of footwear. Their tails were allowed to slide out of their skirts.
The rear of their skirts was cut up down the middle to allow for their tails to slide out. Owen had never talked Blue into wearing basic makeup, though Charlie was still adamantly against the notion. "You both look good," Owen assured them. From behind, hobbling on his cane, was Mr. Hammond, smiling broadly at the two girls. "This is Mr. John Hammond. He's representing you today." "Attention!" Blue shouted, causing both her and Charlie to jump to attention and salute Mr. Hammond, who just chuckled. My, what quick reflexes. I'm afraid there's no need for such formalities. Please, relax, girls. It will look a lot better for you in the courtroom." Both Charlie and Blue relaxed some, and Hammond indicated a few chairs around the room where they could sit. Charlie and Blue hurried to their own chairs and sat down, careful not to sit on their tails. Hammond sat across from them while Owen stood by the door. "I'm going to level with you both," Hammond explained, "but the fate of this trial hinges heavily on the two of you." "What do you need from us?" Blue asked. "I need you both to be relaxed and be yourselves," he answered warmly. There was a childish cheerfulness that seemed to radiate from Hammond that made both Owen and Blue seem to relax, and made Charlie seem more invested in him. "The court is going to try to determine your competency. To the eyes of the Navy, you and your sisters are just weapons, tools to be used, and if the Navy feels this way, then the one responsible for the events last night will be Officer Grady, or Alpha as you know him." "It wasn't his fault, though," Charlie cried, losing her disposition. "He wasn't even there." "I know that, dear. But if the Navy sees you as weapons, then he is responsible for the lives you took. The Navy needs to recognize that you are thinking and feeling creatures, that you are sentient. If they see you as soldiers and not weapons, then your actions were your own responsibility, and thus it can be seen as self-defense." "Well, if our actions are seen as self-defense, will Alpha be okay?" Blue asked. "Yes. You and Owen will both be free to go about your usual business, because it'll be seen as self-defense and no charges will be brought against you," Hammond laughed. "But I'm afraid that depends entirely on you both." "What happens if we can't?" Charlie asked. Hammond didn't answer, but just coughed uncomfortably. Charlie's eyes flew to Owen. "What would happen?" "Well, you'd have to..." "It doesn't matter what would happen," Hammond answered, reaching out and placing a hand on Charlie's clawed fingers, "because you both will do just fine." Charlie beamed happily and looked at Owen and Hammond excitedly. Blue, though smiling, looked much more concerned. "What do we have to do to prove our sentience?" Blue asked. "Well, you'll be required to answer a few questions from myself and the prosecution," Hammond answered. "That's why we're going to talk about here before we go in." Hammond reached into his briefcase sitting by his chair and pulled out a notepad and a pen. "So let me go through what kind of things we're going to talk about in the trial." "We're ready for anything," Blue assured him. "I'm sure you are. I promise that nothing I ask will be difficult or hard for you," he smiled. "I'll simply ask you questions about your daily routine and how much of it is controlled by Mr. Grady." He pointed towards Owen. "However, what the prosecution will say will be much more hurtful, I fear." "How so?" Charlie asked. "Well, for starters, they won't be polite. They'll likely make inferences and suggestions about your relationship with Owen that are simply not true," Hammond sighed. "They'll be trying to tempt a reaction out of you to defend him, or to make yourselves look prone to violence." "But we're not scared of questions," Blue assured him. "Maybe you should be," Owen grumbled. "Why don't we practice a little? I'm going to pretend to be the prosecution, and you pretend you're on the stand. It will help you understand what you're confronting." Blue and Charlie nodded at this, and a long and difficult afternoon of trial prep began. But nothing could have prepared them for what came in only a few days when the trial began. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial. There were dozens of people there, many not even military, who were only there to get a look at the Raptor girls. Sorry. That's something in my throat. Sorry about that. Back to it. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial. There were dozens of people there, many not even military, who were only there to get a look at the Raptor girls that were sitting on behind the defendant table. The prosecutor was a short man with a fine trimmed beard and cold eyes that made Charlie and Blue uncomfortable, so they felt it best not to look at him. Owen sat next to them, seemingly smiling encouragingly. When the judge walked in, he too let his eyes rest on the Raptors, taking them in a moment in awe before sitting down himself. The trial moved slowly, and it was hard to follow everything at first. Owen didn't fully follow all that was said, as he was busy trying to keep Charlie from squirming or moving around in her chair. Charlie was ADHD in a meth pipe. There was no convincing her of keeping still or steady. But finally the fateful words were said that Owen dreaded to hear.
Would the raptor designated Blue please take the stand? Blue stood up quickly and marched around the table, causing a bunch of oohs and ahs from the crowd. She climbed onto the stage and sat down, her feral eyes darting around to take in the setting around her. Hammond walked towards her first and gave a polite grin.
Hello, Blue.
How are you today? He asked.
I'm fine, thank you,
She answered. Owen beamed. She was being professional and polite. Everything she was supposed to be.
How would you say you feel being here? Hammond asked. I feel a bit uncomfortable, she answered. I don't like being put on the spot like this. So you would say you feel conscious of all of us here? Of course I am, she growled in frustration. Blue, do you understand why you're on stand today? Hammond asked. You want to know if I'm a sentient creature? If I'm capable of thinking for myself, she replied forcefully. And how does that make you feel, Blue? Hammond asked. With all due respect, pissed off, Blue snapped. From the moment I was hatched, my sister and I have made our own choices, forcing ourselves to make difficult and harsh decisions just to stay alive. Do you even know what we went through? Owen shot her a dangerous look, and Blue was losing her cool. But with a single sigh, Blue began to breathe again and calm herself. This was good, and what Hammond had taught her to do. Getting upset would only hurt their case by making Blue and the Raptors look highly strung and emotional, showing that they were prone to violence. It was vital that they were maintaining calm. So you make difficult choices regularly? That's what it means to be a leader, Blue answered. My sisters need me. Because they can't make decisions themselves? Hammond asked, curious. No, because I'm their older sibling, and because it's an older sibling's job to take care of their younger siblings. This got a soft hum from the crowd. A good sign. Hammond smiled and walked away. No more questions. The prosecutor stood up after him and adjusted his tie, smiling at Blue, though his grin had no warmth or friendliness in it, more of a smoldering arrogance. So, you make the big decisions for your sisters? He asked. Yes, Blue answered. Was that always the case? He asked. What do you mean? Who made the decisions before you were their leader? No one. We chose the leader out of the four of us. The prosecutor reached for a notebook on his table and looked over it a moment and then smiled again. That smile was starting to piss off Owen. The second oldest of your sisters, Echo, right? He asked. What about her? She has a long scar on her face, doesn't she? Blue stiffened, and even Charlie trembled and lowered her head solemnly. How did she get that? Objection, Hammond called. This question isn't relevant. If you give me a moment, Your Honor, I will reveal the relevance. The prosecutor assured the judge. The judge looked at him for a moment and sighed. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, he cautioned. The prosecutor turned back to Blue. Well, how did Echo get her scar? Blue sneered and looked towards her feet. We got into a fight when we were younger. This was before we met Owen, she grumbled. What was the fight about? He asked. To determine who would be the alpha of our pack, Blue answered. So you fight to decide leadership. That seems a little excessive to me. Objection, Hammond shouted. Sustained, the judge replied. The prosecutor nodded and returned to his questions. So, what made Echo unfit to be the leader? That's not important, Blue answered. It is to this court, was the fierce reply. Blue tensed up and the judge looked at her seriously. Do you need a moment? He asked. Echo is my sister. I love her, but she was arrogant. She was hot-headed. She was more in love with personal strength than she was leading our pack. I told her not to challenge me for leadership, and she didn't listen, so... Yes, so we fought. And you won? Obviously. So you put her in her place, he asked. No, that's not what I meant at all. It isn't? Your subordinate was out of line and you put her back into line. You put her back in her place, didn't you? That's not true. I think her scar might say otherwise. Objection, Hammond roared. Withdrawn, the prosecutor sighed, turning away. I have no more questions. The room was deathly silent, and Blue only sat in defeat, looking like she'd lost at a battle or a game of some sort. Owen tried to show encouragement towards her, but she wouldn't even meet his gaze. The knowledge of how she and Echo had been rivals in the past and how she'd hurt her the way she had, it was still a point of contention for her. How could the prosecutor have known this? Owen himself hadn't known about that scar and the reason for it until Echo and Blue had told him about it. So who told the prosecution? How did he know about the scar? Hammond smiled and pat Blue on the back as she came back to sit down, but he too looked a bit nervous. Your Honor, may I request a 10-minute recess? Granted, the judge answered as everyone began to rise. Hammond leaned over to Owen, a lot of anger and frustration in his face. How does the prosecution know this information? He asked. I don't know, but I am going to find out, Owen grumbled. All right, that was chapter 9. Next is chapter 10. Let's jump right into it. Let's not waste any time.
Area Life with Raptors, Part 10. Written November 12th, 2019. "We'd like to call Charlie to the stand," called Dr. Hammond. Blue glanced at Owen with enough fear to show that she wanted to run out of the room. And fast. Charlie rose up and made her way to the stand, smiling, her usual excited grin. Owen and Dr. Hammond had tried to brief her on what would be asked and how she should answer, but whether or not she retained it was the real question. Charlie took the same oath, and then Dr. Hammond stood up and approached her, beaming broadly. "Good afternoon, Charlie. How are you feeling today?" he asked. "I'm okay. I don't really like wearing my uniform, though," she answered. "Charlie, do you know why you're here? What this trial is about?" "Yes, sir," Charlie answered with a slight sneer. "You're trying to prove that me and my sisters are sentient, right? That we're not weapons." "Do you think you're sentient?" Hammond asked. "I don't really know what it means, but I know that we're not weapons." "Well, how do you know that?" Hammond asked. "Do I look like a gun to you?" Charlie snapped. The courtroom hummed with a ripple of laughter, and the judge had to bang his gavel once again to return silence. But Charlie had already accomplished what Owen and Hammond were hoping for. Though immature and childish in every situation, this would help prove a case for sentience and cognizance. They weren't blind and unthinking animals. Hammond smiled at Charlie and nodded. "You certainly don't to me," he laughed. "Charlie, what happened on the night you and your sisters were called to duty at the smuggling compound?" "We got shot at." "Did you get hurt?" "I did," she answered, pointing to her arm. "It hurt a lot, and it was really scary." "When you found out that the targets you'd been sent to deal with were humans, what does protocol say to do in that circumstance?" Charlie's brow furrowed a moment as she thought about it. "I'm not as good at understanding the protocol stuff."
Objection! The prosecutor stood up. "This witness is bordering on incompetent. If she can't even explain the fundamental protocols she's supposed to follow, then how can we trust her testimony on it?" The judge glanced at them and then at Hammond. "Sustained. Change the question and move on, counselor."
"Allow me to rephrase the question," Hammond sighed. "What do you know you were supposed to do in that situation?" "Well, we're supposed to pull back and regroup with Officer Grady."
Hammond turned to the jury and smiled.
"The protocol clearly states, doesn't it, that in the event of confronting human hostiles, your team is not to engage and instead report to their—"
"Objection! Asked and answered," the prosecutor shouted.
"Charlie knew what the protocol was, but didn't realize she did. I'm simply restating what she said so the jury can recognize this is a case of misunderstanding," the judge groaned.
"We've got it now. Please move on, counselor."
"I'm not sure I like the prosecutor much," Blue whispered to Owen.
"You're not supposed to. Just
bear with it a little longer," Owen answered. They both looked back to Hammond as he approached Charlie. "Charlie, were you afraid for your life?" "I was." "When Blue gave the order to engage the targets, did you agree with the decision?" "I wasn't sure," Charlie answered honestly. "I knew that we weren't supposed to, but it was a desperate situation. I had the right to protect myself." "You had the right to?" Hammond asked. "So you believe yourself independent and capable of thinking and acting for yourself with your own inalienable rights?" I don't know what inalienable means, but yeah. I mean, we're soldiers, aren't we? We should be treated like it." "I couldn't agree more," Hammond beamed. "Just one more question, Charlie. If you were given a second chance, would you still follow Blue's orders to engage those men and kill them?"
"Objection!" the prosecutor scoffed, standing up. "Not only is this hardly relevant, but we're not here to debate what could have been done."
"If you'll permit me, Your Honor," Hammond asked reasonably.
The judge rubbed his forehead in frustration. "Last chance, counselor."
He raised a finger to symbolize it, and with his last chance, and Hammond turned back to Charlie.
"Well," Charlie shrugged, "I don't think I would have. I mean, look at all the trouble it's caused my family. I don't want to put us through this ever again." "Full awareness of your actions and the consequences of them. I've never known a gun that could do that."
"Objection!"
"Withdrawn,"
Hammond smirked, turning and walking back to his table.
"That's all for this witness."
Charlie smiled as Owen gave her a thumbs up. The prosecution stood, adjusting his tie and then looking at Charlie with a smile that held anything but warm.
"On the night in question, you said you were injured. Did that impact your decision-making?" he asked.
"Not really. I mean, I was scared, but I wasn't worried about making bad decisions."
"Why not?"
"Well, Blue makes the decisions," Charlie answered. "She's the beta, so she's second in command. If Alpha's not around, then... if Officer Grady isn't around, she makes the decisions."
"Is that always the case?" he asked.
"Yes, always," Charlie answered.
"Have you ever questioned Blue's decisions? Or even Alpha's, for that matter?" he asked.
Charlie shrugged. "Sometimes, but they know what's best. It's easier to trust their decisions."
So it could be said that you don't think for yourself. Objection, Hammond snapped.
I do think for myself, Charlie snarled.
The judge banged his gavel again to silence the room. The objection is sustained, he growled. I'm sorry, Your Honor, the prosecutor replied. He then turned to Charlie. Charlie, do all of your sisters follow Blue's leadership?
Of course.
Always?
Always.
No matter what? Objection, Hammond shouted. Asked and answered. Sustained. What happens when you don't? He continued without skipping a beat.
Charlie tensed up a little as the prosecutor walked back to his table and pulled out a series of laminated photographs. Each one had a different profile shot of Echo when she was younger. They each had a fresh image of the scar that ran across her face. They were medical photos from the incident. Owen had seen them only once, but he didn't have access to them. Blue looked away in disgust and disdain, and Charlie bit her lip, and Hammond was beside himself. Objection! I request to approach the bench, he shouted. The judge nodded and waved both of the lawyers up to speak to him privately. Blue was trembling with rage as Owen stared at the bench, trying to hear what was being said. He couldn't hear, but he could tell it was a heated discussion. How did they have those? Owen hissed. Everything that happened to you girls on that island is classified. Alpha, this is bad. I don't think I like what they're going to ask Charlie, Blue said. Let's just hope Hammond can shut this down, Owen agreed. After a few more moments of discussion, the judge waved them back. The photos will be admitted into evidence. Hammond sat back down, anger etched on his face. Hammond, those are classified images. How can they admit them? It's complicated. I'll explain later, Hammond whispered. Don't worry, I'll make sure that he doesn't take things anywhere they shouldn't go. Charlie, the prosecution proceeded, do you remember Blue giving these scars to Echo? I do. And do you remember why? Yeah, Echo was vying for leadership. So Echo wanted to be the leader, and when she did that, Blue put her back in her place. Is that correct? Objection! Sustained. Let me try a different question. Does Blue usually physically injure her subordinates when they don't do what she says? No, Charlie cried. Blue loves us. She only did what she did for Echo's own good. So that scar on her face is for her own good. It's not like that, Charlie cried. Owen swiftly had to grab Blue's arm to stop her from leaping out of her seat in a fury. Then tell me what it's like, he nearly shouted. What good can come from scratching your subordinate, or rather sister's face, so horribly? Charlie had tears building up in her eyes as she tried to think of the right words to say. We're all smart. We can't act alone. Since we were hatched, we don't remember our parents. We always had to look out for one another. Blue was the wisest, the smartest. She knows a lot and knows how to lead. She cared about all of us and wanted what was best for all of us. Echo, she didn't. She was full of herself. She was a braggy person, if that's the word for it. Blue, we knew that Blue would make a good leader, so they fought and Blue won. So Blue knew what was best? Yes. And because she knows what's best, you do anything she tells you to do? Yes. And if she told you to kill Delta, Echo, or even Alpha, would you do it? Objection! Hammond roared. Blue was on her feet, and Owen had to grab her around the middle to pull her back down. No, I never do that. But you just said you'd do whatever Blue told you to do. Stop, that's not what I meant. You're confusing me. What's so confusing, Charlie? You're a soldier. You said it yourself. You do what you're told. So if Blue told you to kill your comrade for your own good, as you said, would you do it, yes or no? Stop it, Charlie cried, covering her ears as if she could block out the question. Objection! This is outrageous, Hammond bellowed. The judge slammed his gavel on the desk with tremendous force 3 times. That's enough, counselor. One more word and I'll hold you in contempt. Sustained on all counts. Your Honor, I'd like to redirect, Hammond pleaded. Charlie was bent over, crying into her knees as she held her hands over her ears. Hammond, I don't think she's in a fit state for that, the judge said. Trust me, Your Honor. Please. The judge gazed down at Charlie before finally giving a brief nod for Hammond to go ahead. Hammond stood and approached Charlie slowly and calmly. Charlie, calm down. Can you hear me? She nodded. Charlie, why did that question confuse you? Charlie didn't answer at first, simply sitting still and sobbing. Charlie, I need to know. Why couldn't you answer that question? I can't kill my family because they're all I have. Charlie whimpered through sobs, making Blue shake as she too was crying. We need each other. Blue would never tell me to do that because if I killed them, we'd all die too. I love my sisters and Alpha. And without another word, she ran from the stand and flew to Blue's arms, who caught her and held her in a warm embrace, stroking her hair reassuringly. Shh, it's okay. softly whispered, trying to console her.
This court is adjourned for the day, the judge sighed. I think we could all use a break. We'll reconvene tomorrow at 9:30.
With another bang of his gavel, the court began to disperse. Owen stood up from his seat and smiled sadly at Hammond.
John, how bad is it? Owen asked.
We can make this work for us. By forcing Charlie to cry on the stand, he further validated their emotional state. He won't win on that argument alone. I have to go back to my office and prepare. Be ready, though. Because tomorrow he's planning on calling you to the stand, Hammond said.
Right,
Owen answered. I'd like to meet with you tonight to go over what he'll likely ask. He turned and started to walk away, but as he passed out of view, Owen saw someone else, an overweight figure moving through the crowd.
That son of a bitch,
he hissed. Owen moved fast once he was outside of the courtroom and could catch up to the much more slow and lumbering fellow in front of him. He moved swift and efficiently like a guided missile.
Hoskins, you arrogant son of a bitch, he snapped.
Hoskins spun around just in time for Owen to grab him by the collar and slam him against the wall of the courthouse.
What is the matter with... What the hell are you doing, you fat bastard? Owen spat. You're the one with clearance to have access to those photos of Echo. You've been feeding information to the prosecution on this case, and I want to know why. Just what kind of game do you think you're playing, Grady? Hoskins answered forcefully. The Navy didn't hand those girls over to you so you could play house. They're trained and efficient killing machines, and it's time the world realized that. They're girls, Owen bellowed. They deserve a life and a future that doesn't involve ripping open throats. And the fact you think that shows that leaving them in your charge was a mistake, Hoskins snapped. Under your roof, you have 4 of the most efficient weapons the world has ever seen. A perfect combination of prehistoric and modern killing power. You saw it yourself on that goddamn island. What I saw were 4 girls terrified for their lives reacting to a dangerous situation. And what I saw were the most deadly weapons in forest combat I've ever laid eyes on.
Owen stopped a moment as the realization hit him. You were there.
You knew what would happen, Owen snapped. You set this up!
Hoskins adjusted his shirt as Owen released him, and he coughed very professionally.
It's time you woke up and realized what's going on here, Mr. Grady, he explained. This is a march of progress. And progress breeds warriors and creates success, and it always wins in the end. If this is what you call progress, Hoskins, taking these girls and putting them back on that island of yours, turning them into nothing more than guns, then I hope to God progress loses this round. You have a good day, Grady, Hoskins answered, marching off and leaving Owen fuming behind him, wondering what on earth his next move would have to be. All right, and I think that is where we shall call it. We've read pretty far. We've definitely gone beyond our normal time. Well, thank you guys. I want to thank you guys so much for watching tonight. This was a lot of fun. I love doing these reading streams. We finished up New Epic, and until I write new chapters for it, we'll need to pick another long-running story to read. I've got plenty, so I'll propose some options next time. I'm glad that you guys are enjoying the Monster Club and the Raptor Girls. Been going really well. I'm going to go ahead and sign off in just a second, but thank you guys so much for watching. As always, I might stream tomorrow. We'll have to see. Might even be doing it with Havoc. Who knows? We'll see what happens. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for being here and for watching these streams. I hope you enjoy them. And as always, guys, I will see you in my next video. Take care.